Welcome everyone to the 2009 NFL Draft. How this will work is I'll probably talk about the first round. I'll give a synopsis of each pick, and then we'll move into just viewing each round since then. In the next video, I will break down each team, so what each team's draft looked like. So to begin, we have the Green Bay Packers picking number 1 overall, a team that desperately needs to get some sort of spark. With Mike Tomlin, new head coach, his first pick in the NFL Draft, the Green Bay Packers select quarterback Matthew Stafford. No big surprise here, quite expected. So Stafford is going to be, instead of in Detroit, he will be playing for the Green Bay Packers. So sorry to any Lions fans out there. This is just how the chips fell. Matthew Stafford is going to be the quarterback for Green Bay and likely going to be very successful there, most likely. Then Jack Del Rio on the clock with the Washington team. With the second overall pick in the 2009 NFL Draft, the Washington team selects wide receiver Darius Haywood-Bay. Ooh, that's a weird choice. But we look at some of the players that were on the board at the time. They didn't really need a left tackle. They already took care of that with Chris Williams the year before. And I wasn't going to have them go with another quarterback because they just signed Michael Vick. Yes, they could have maybe went with Aaron Curry or Tyson Jackson. But when I looked at some of their biggest needs, it looked like it was a playmaker that was missing. And so Washington thinks that Darius Haywood-Bay can be that playmaker. Next on the clock is the Jacksonville Jaguars. With the third overall pick, the Jaguars select right tackle Jason Smith. So obviously Jason Smith was perceived as one of the best players in this draft, one of the best top-tier talents. Jacksonville needing some help on that right side of the line. Kwame Brown is doing fairly well. Kwame Harris, excuse me, is doing fairly well in his role with the Jaguars. Left tackle, but they did need to shore up the right side, and taking Jason Smith made the most sense. Now we'll move on to the next pick. Picking at number 4, the Chicago Bears. And with the 4th overall pick, the Chicago Bears select quarterback Mark Sanchez. After missing on Carr and Vick and not really wanting the other aged quarterbacks like Warner or Gannon, the Bears go with the young Mark Sanchez from USC. We'll see how Sanchez does in Chicago. I mean, he is a hidden dev, so he has a lot of potential there. We'll see if this future battle between Matthew Stafford and Mark Sanchez, both in the NFC North, facing each other 2 times a year. They'll be going up against Brett Favre in Minnesota and Brody Croyle in Detroit. We'll see how they fare in these upcoming years. Could be very interesting if they both succeed. Next, to the 5th overall pick, the New Orleans Saints select outside linebacker Aaron Curry. So here we go with the first defensive player off the board with the linebacker Curry. I had such high hopes for Curry in real life. I mean, when he went to Seattle, I thought he was going to be a beast. He did not turn out to be that. We will see how the Saints handle this pick. Ideally, they're looking at him as being a key player on their defense. We'll see if he rises to that challenge. Next on the board is the Kansas City Chiefs. And with the 6th overall selection, the Kansas City Chiefs select right end Tyson Jackson. Yes, this was a real-life pick, but it happened to work out perfectly. They decided to move on from Ty Warren, and Warren went off in free agency to, I forget where, let's double check. He went to the Baltimore Ravens, and now they look to replace him with Tyson Jackson. I think a good pick here. Probably will be a long-term answer for their defense. With the 7th overall selection, the Arizona Cardinals select left tackle Andre Smith. So yes, they did trade for a left tackle. That was a move that they did when they got rid of Ricky Williams. But Andre Smith was just too good to pass up at this position. So therefore, Cardinals pick Andre Smith. With the 8th overall pick, the New York Jets select wide receiver Percy Harvin. So here we have Dante Stallworth, who was their top tier receiver. He is going to be suspended for an entire year. So right now he's in free agency right now. They have Chad Ochocinco, who had one of his best career performances last year for the New York Jets. But they now need to have another option for this team. So I expect that Percy Harvin and Alex Smith are going to have a delightful showdown together. Because, yeah, Stallworth had 1,300 yards and Chad Ochocinco had 1,100 yards. But Ochocinco had 17 touchdowns. Other than Stallworth and Ochocinco, it was Mark Clayton who had 23 receptions and 379 yards. So losing Stallworth is huge, but gaining Percy Harvin might be the replacement they need. With the 9th overall selection, the Dallas Cowboys select pass rusher Brian Orakpo. So the Cowboys have a lot of weapons on offense, allegedly. So they have, of course, Vince Young at quarterback, who runs often. He had 410 yards last year and 3 touchdowns. They also have Adrian Peterson. They just traded for Ricky Williams to kind of be the backup for Peterson. Then they have Braylon Edwards, Chad Jackson, Mario Manningham. So offensively, they were doing all right. They were 13th in pass yards, 3rd in rush yards, but they were 32nd in defense when it came to pass defense. They were 30th in points allowed. They were 11th with rush yards allowed, but when we take a look at where they need help, it's their defense, and Dallas decided to go and improve their pass rusher. Then with the 10th overall selection, the Buffalo Bills select outside linebacker Larry English. So outside linebacker was a need of theirs. Their defense did not perform as well last year. I mean, technically nothing performed well. Even Dante Culpepper, he did have 3,400 yards. Edgar and James had nearly 1,300 yards. Jacoby Jones had 1,100 yards. Ben Watson had over 1,000. Dexter Jackson, one of their rookies last year, had 10 receiving touchdowns. But their defense was 26th in pass yards, 23rd in points, and 29th in rush yards. So picking Larry English is filling a need in their linebacking core, and ideally would be a good pick in this situation. We'll see if he turns out to be better than he was in real life. Moving on to the next 10 picks, we have the 11th overall selection with the Cleveland Browns. And Cleveland Browns select defensive tackle B.J. Raji. So B.J. Raji was an original pick of the Green Bay Packers. Now he is joining the Cleveland Browns. Browns have never really had a defensive tackle since I've started this franchise. I can't think of one other than, I think it was Gerard Warren. And I just kind of kept Warren. And so Warren's been gone. They struggled a bit. They were the 29th ranked pass defense. They were 9th in rushing, so maybe I should have gone more DB. But they did end up getting Lee Bodden in free agency, and they do have Stanford Route, Sean Jones as safety. They did lose Sean Taylor to his murder, or to his death 2 years ago. But B.J. Raji, big man up front, really, I think a good pick for Cleveland. He'll be good for them for a while. Next, for the 12th overall selection, the St. Louis Rams select wide receiver Michael Crabtree. So the Rams here, they had Roy Williams last year, who did very well for them. 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns. Romo and Cobb didn't do as great. I mean, combined, the quarterbacks were about 3,100 yards-ish. But they were the 23rd passing offense, 28th rushing offense. Their defense was fine. They were 2nd in pass yards and 15th in rush yards. But other than Roy Williams, they had Darius Watts, who left them for the San Diego Chargers. They needed a wide receiver too, and I think Michael Crabtree is going to do excellent there. With the 13th overall selection, the Buccaneers select wide receiver Jeremy Maclin. So I know my Bucs fans may be very excited about that pick. So whether it's Trent Edwards or Byron Leftwich taking the snaps, they had the number 1 rusher in the league, who was rookie Darren McFadden, 1,500 yards, 16 touchdowns. But with their receiving core, they had Antonio Caldwell, who had 728 yards. And Marty Booker with 559 yards. Owen Daniels, 712. No receiver stood out. Now, that could be because Edwards was not great, but this is a 31st ranked pass offense and a second-ranked rushing offense. So they can run the ball well, but they sucked at passing. So Jeremy Maclin is going to be there as another option, as the main option for Leftwich or Trent Edwards. With the 14th overall selection, the Houston Texans select Andy Levitre, offensive guard. So Texans try to get their interior line set up. They now have a new quarterback with David Garrard or Matt Flynn. I mean, Matt Flynn could, I suppose, get the starting job. I'm not opposed to that. But Perry had 882 yards rushing last year. Parker, 491. Carr, 277. They were a decent rushing attack, but with Perry gone, with Carr gone, I mean, Garrard might increase that as a quarterback, but I figured having that offensive guard to help with that rushing game was important, and Andy Levitre was probably the best guard in this class. Next, the Oakland Raiders are on the clock with the 15th overall selection, and Oakland selects middle linebacker Brian Cushing. Yes, I do allow the Oakland Raiders to have nice things, and this was a desperate need for the Raiders, was having someone in that middle of their defense, and Brian Cushing could not be a better pick for them. So they are set with their quarterback with Matt Ryan. They still have Willis McGahee. They had James Hardy, who was their second-round pick last year. We had 1,300 yards receiving, 16 passing touchdowns. Matt Ryan's favorite target, so that rookie combo working well together, putting together the 7th best ranked passing offense. But defense was needing some help. 21st in points, 30th in pass yards, 18th in rush yards. So having Cushing there as a centerpiece is going to be tremendous for the Oakland Raiders. We'll see if they can make a playoff push this year. Then the Baltimore Ravens are on the clock with the 16th overall selection, and they go with cornerback Vontae Davis. They lost Chris McAllister, who was big for them, and they were the 6th-ranked passing defense. But losing McAllister was a major loss, and so Vontae Davis was a good pick for a team that is known for their strong defense, and Vontae Davis will fill that void of Chris McAllister. With the 17th overall selection, the New York Giants select left tackle Eugene Monroe. I feel Monroe slipped farther than he should have, and so this was a great pick by the New York Giants, who have Matt Schaub, who did not have the best passing year last year. When Terrell Owens retired, that made a major gap in their passing. Jeremy Shockey, their tight end, led their team with 824 yards. All they had was Michael Clayton, 766, Jerome Simpson, 589, and Plaxico Burress only had 258 yards last year, and Burress is now suspended for an entire year. I think it was because of a gun infraction in real life. So he's out. So they needed to figure something out here, and I figured left tackle was a good spot to go with. Monroe could be their starter for the next decade. Now with the 18th overall selection, the Miami Dolphins select James Laurinaitis from Ohio State. So we have our second middle linebacker going after Cushing. In real life, Laurinaitis went to the second round. Not going to happen in my draft class. I mean, I tend to prioritize defense and specifically linebackers. Very few good middle linebackers. So Miami with McNair, who's going to die this offseason. I didn't go with a quarterback for them here in the first round. Their idea is sticking with McNair, who is 36 years old. And they go with They have Steven Jackson. They signed. Which running back did they sign? It was Chris Perry to be in running back, but needing some help on their defense to restock their talent. Laurinaitis is brilliant. He's gonna be good for them. With the 19th overall selection, the Cincinnati Bengals select Noshawn Marino, running back. Now, Marino is joining the 19th ranked rush attack. Brian Westbrook last year had 1,100 yards, 12 touchdowns, but he's getting really old, and Westbrook did leave the team. Ron Dane is not an option. Joris Norwood is not an option. I need to find a way to help this Bengals rushing attack, and they have not had a solid running back. I mean, since Eddie George was good, but he was also old. And Rudy Johnson never became the running back that he was in real life. So Noshawn Marino going to the Bengals is going to be their number one guy, and he's going to get a good number of carries. Westbrook also leaving the team because he fumbled during the playoff game, which was a huge loss for them against the Colts in the first round of the playoffs. Next, we have the Denver Broncos selecting with the 20th overall pick, and the Broncos select defensive end Aaron Maben. So we know Maben was not that great of a player in real life, but he joins the 23rd ranked pass defense and 17th ranked rush defense, kind of a gap on this playoff team. Aaron Maben is going to help out with the depth on their pass rush. Next, with the 21st overall selection, we have the Tennessee Titans selecting offensive tackle Michael Orr. Now, Michael Orr, the star of The Blind Side, did go to Tennessee. Tennessee was his home state in college. He went to the Baltimore Ravens in real life. This year, the Tennessee Titans decide that they want Orr, to protect Kevin O'Connell. So they got their star quarterback, allegedly, last year. They have Greg Jennings. They have Anquan Bolden, Matthew Slater, good receivers. Jonathan Stewart ran for 802 yards in his rookie year. Titans are good, but giving them Orr is going to help them out tremendously. Next, for the 22nd overall selection, the Atlanta Falcons select outside linebacker Clay Matthews. Clay Matthews was too good to pass up. I mean, he slipped all the way down to 22. Could have been maybe taken earlier with his known talent. But they made the playoffs last year. They have a decent offense. They had the 7th ranked best pass defense, but 25th rush defense. So they definitely need to fix that front 7. Their defensive backs are arguably some of the best in the league, but now they add one of the best linebackers in the league, potentially. Now, the 23rd overall pick, the Seattle Seahawks select tight end Brandon Pettigrew. So the Seahawks have never really had a good tight end, even though Baker last year was their leading receiver with 911 yards, 4 touchdowns, receiving from Tavares Jackson and even David Garrard. But I figured that he was like a 60, 61 overall, and I was just sick and tired of having mediocre tight ends in Seattle. So Seattle gets Brandon Pettigrew, big guy, good receiving tight end. Looking forward to seeing how Greg Schiano ends up leading this Seattle team with this new tight end. Now with the 24th overall pick, the Detroit Lions select center Alex Mack. And now I love Alex Mack as a Browns fan. I considered drafting him with the 11th overall pick, but I figured the DT was more valuable for Cleveland in this moment, as Eugene Amano has been a decent center for them. But Detroit needed to brush up their O-line, and here they are with Alex Mack, who's going to be a starter for them for the next decade, giving Brody Croyle some more support, giving Reggie Bush, Danny Woodhead some receiving backs, some better blocking up front. Now the Minnesota Vikings are on the clock with the 25th overall selection, and with that pick, the Vikings select center Max Unger. Wow, another center coming off the board. Vikings didn't have many needs. I mean, they're pretty solid. We see Kevin Smith going to be more of a role player next year as a starting running back for them with Ronnie Brown, who was a starter last year, who is a weaker overall than Smith, probably taking more of a backup role. Vincent Jackson left them, so they still have Daryl Jackson, but they're going to need to help their wide receiving core coming up. But we're looking at what their biggest needs were. Fixing the O-line was one of them. Max Unger is going to be a role player there. Then for the 26th overall selection, the Indianapolis Colts select right tackle Eben Britton. So Britton, was kind of a second round tier talent. Colts decided to go with him because they have their running back with Chris Johnson, quarterback Peyton Manning. They've got Reggie Wayne. They're making a player out of Woods, of Aroma Shodu is actually doing well with the Colts. PK Sams. So they might pick one later, but I figured get the best talent there, and that was Eben Britton. Then you have the Carolina Panthers on the clock. And with the 27th overall pick, the Carolina Panthers select cornerback Alfonso Smith. So Panthers have their quarterback, Joe Flacco, drafted last year. They've got Larry Johnson, Lorenzo Booker, Steve Smith. Maybe they could have gone with a wide receiver like a Hakeem Nicks or a Kenny Britt with this pick, but I decided that they lost Ty Law in retirement. Their best cornerback was Dre Bly, who was like 70 overall, and they did draft someone last year, but I'm like, they need more help here with cornerback, and I thought Alphonso Smith would be a good pick for them. Carolina is known for their defense. They're first in everything. First in points, pass yards, rush yards, takeaways, top-tier defense, and you keep investing in that defense, especially in the defensive backfield where many of them can get injured, and so we're going with the cornerback there for the Panthers. Then with the 28th overall pick, the New England Patriots select cornerback Ellis Langster. Man, they were just one pick away from Alphonso Smith. Instead, the Patriots go with Ellis Langster. He is someone that I don't even recognize, so not really probably a good pick here. But with a team that has made the playoffs every year, they were the number one team in the AFC. They're polishing their defensive backfield because their offense already is pretty solid. They were the first-ranked passing team. They were 18th in rushing, and they still have Jamal Charles, who ran for 1,100 yards, 18 touchdowns. But they were 15th in pass yards on defense and 20th in rush yards. So helping the defense was not a bad choice here. Obviously, Ellis Langster is not going to be the player that they hope him to be, kind of like Andre Woolfolk. Woolfolk was their first pick I ever made with them. He's like a 70 overall cornerback. And so they have Champ Bailey, and then they have Woolfolk. Now they have Ellis Langster. Probably going to spend some years with them, but never being an iconic player for them. Now the San Diego Chargers are on the clock. With the 28th overall selection, the San Diego Chargers select running back Beanie Wells from Ohio State University. So Beanie Wells went to the Cardinals in real life, never went anywhere. Chargers went with a running back here because Tomlinson, he had that big injury. He returned last year, and then he got hurt again. Tomlinson was 727 yards, 12 touchdowns. Problem with Tomlinson is he's older, and I did lower his injury because of that gruesome injury he suffered 2 years ago. That took him out the entire year and a little bit into this current year. So they had like Patrick, Julius Jones, and yeah, Julius Jones had one really good game. He had a big run one game. It was a big highlight. But other than that, they didn't really have a good rushing attack if it wasn't for Tomlinson. So I thought Beanie Wells was the pick that they needed to make. And so he is the second running back off the draft here after Noshawn Marino. Now with the 30th overall pick, the Philadelphia Eagles select middle linebacker Ray Maualuga. So Maualuga, one of the best middle linebackers left on the board and still a solid one. He went to the Bengals in real life, but here he is going to be helping the NFC champion losers, Philadelphia Eagles. They had an 11-6 record. They were 21st in pass yards allowed and 27th in rush yards, so they didn't really have that great of a defense. Their pass yards were 6th for offense, and they were 1st in rushing yards, which is really interesting because I didn't see them as that big of a rushing team, even though Amon Green joined them mid-year. Amon Green hit 1,000 yards total. That included Green Bay and his Philadelphia. 15 touchdowns, but he had some 200-yard games. Sproles had 795, and that's where it is. So I was wondering why the Buccaneers were second in rush yards because they had McFadden with 1,500 yards. The reason why they were second was because Green had 1,000 yards rushing, nearly 1,100. Darren Sproles had 795, and then McNabb had 300, and rookie Tim Hightower had 105 yards. So Eagles were a powerhouse running team, but on their defense, they had some holes to fill, and that Ray Maualuga will do that. And no, that's not what she said. Then we look at the 31st overall pick with the San Francisco 49ers. The 31st overall pick is cornerback Darius Butler. So the 49ers go similar with the Panthers and Patriots. The NFC champions but Super Bowl losers get a cornerback to help their defensive backfield. Again, when you have a lot of talent on your team, you go with BPA and you go with positions that you want a lot of depth, and that was cornerback. Especially when they were the 20th pass-ranked defense in the league. So they want to really help that pass defense. Then with the 32nd overall pick, the Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers select defensive tackle, Pariah Jerry. So they get someone up front for their nose tackle. They do have Casey Hampton, who was a former Super Bowl MVP for them back in 2005. We know that the Super Bowl champion or MVP this year was their safety, Deshaun Goldson. But Pariah Jerry adds more depth. The defensive tackles for Pittsburgh kept getting older. I think 29 was the youngest. So I figured adding more depth on their D-line was necessary. Now moving on to round 2 and the future drafts. I'm just going to let you see everybody. LeSean McCoy goes to the Green Bay Packers. So Matthew Stafford, LeSean McCoy, Mike Tomlin is rebuilding Green Bay in a very good fashion. Ziggy Hood is now in Washington. We see Hakeem Nicks and Britt going to the Jaguars and Saints respectively. Josh Freeman drops all the way to the 10th pick in the second round and is taken by Buffalo, who has a 32-year-old Dante Culpepper who did not have the best season last year. So potentially we could look at Culpepper being replaced next year, or maybe Freeman will learn under Culpepper the 4-time the 4-time league MVP as he grows in his quarterback journey. Robisky to Cleveland as a real-life pick. Miami Dolphins do pick Pat White as quarterback, so that was a real-life pick, and he actually might get a chance to start this year with Steve McNair passing away in the summer of 2009. Let's see, anyone else of interest? Mike Wallace goes to Minnesota. So there we go. I mentioned Minnesota getting a center. They lost Vincent Jackson. Now they get Mike Wallace. Good pickup for them there. Green Bay gets Henry Melton with that 30th overall pick in the second round. Moving on to the third and fourth rounds here. So we see Green Bay getting a DT, helping their defense out. Kaluka Maeva was a real-life Cleveland pick. Dallas gets James Casey, a tight end. Right now they have Daniel Graham, who's a 63 overall. I think Casey turned out to be like a 62, but he's going to be a good rookie for them. Let's see who else is notable. Connor Barwin going to Detroit. Sebastian Vollmer, good O-lineman for the Patriots. He went there in real life. BPA position there. Chris Obanaya, a real-life pick for the Browns. Well, he was an undrafted person, but I ended up drafting him. Brian Hartline, real-life pick going to the Miami Dolphins from Ohio State. So I guess the Miami Dolphins like Ohio State players by picking Laurinaitis and Brian Hartline in the same draft. Zach Miller to Detroit. Julian Edelman is going to the Green Bay Packers. And yes, Edelman was undrafted. I try to draft players that were undrafted in real life during the draft because if they're good, I think the draft is the best place to randomize who goes where. If I just sign them in free agency, I'm literally picking which team gets them. Whereas I am kind of doing the same thing. I guess I am literally picking in the draft, but the draft is much more in the moment pick. Who's there at the right time? What's the positional need? And so it's easier for me to randomize it in the draft. And so that's where we see Julian Edelman going to Green Bay. We see Arian Foster going to the San Francisco 49ers. So here we go. Frank Gore going to get some pressure from this rookie Arian Foster. Moving on to the 5th and 6th rounds here. Dannell Ellerbe going to Green Bay. So Green Bay is stocking up on picks. Tomlin's doing a great job with this draft. I think Green Bay probably nailed it, even though, of course, they had the first overall pick. But they hit well throughout this draft. We see, who else? Brian Hoyer going to Minnesota. My man, Brian Hoyer, Cleveland Brown and San Francisco 49er legend. Desmond Bryant with the best mugshot in NFL history going to the 49ers. Suckup going to the Chiefs, and that was a real-life selection. Jordan Norwood did play for the Browns, and I drafted him in the 6th round there. Greg Orton, Yoquan Iglesias going to Tennessee. Graham Gano, kicker, going to the Falcons. Pat McCaffrey going to Detroit as a punter. Captain Munnerlyn going to the Panthers. So Panthers get Munnerlyn, and they went with Alfonso Smith. So the Panthers are really making sure their defense stays number one and really fixing their biggest glaring hole, which is their defensive backs. And then round 7, let's see. The Mr. Irrelevant was John Parker Wilson going to the Steelers. He'll probably be on practice squad, especially when they have Roethlisberger, Pennington, and Quinn. I might have overstacked their quarterback room, but we'll see. Pennington's probably the guy out because Quinn is younger and might stick around. I might keep all three. I don't know yet. But Austin Collie, maybe a decent surprise. He was on the Colts in real life. Gartrell Johnson is a running back that went to the Colts. Johnny Knox went to New England. You never know because some of these players might surprise you when they have Manning or Brady throwing to them. All right, and with that all said, this concludes the round drafts for each of us, but I'll have a video breaking down each team's draft in a little bit.